Welcome. I'm Pastor Angie Lynch with The Truth Driven Life. Today we started a sermon series on rising above the static. The topic of today's rising above the static was Joseph. Come and learn how he went from the pit to Potiphar to prison to the palace. Come on, join us for this live feed. Hey, welcome to Truth Driven Ministries, Truth Driven Life. We are live streaming now, and we're also about to begin our live in person. So this week I was going back and forth about what to start a series on, and how this series kind of came about was one day I went to go pick up the phone, and when I picked up the phone, all I could hear was somebody was trying to call in, and I could literally hear nothing that they were saying because there was so much static on the line, so much distortion, so much noise. So I hang up and I pick up the phone again to get a dial tone to see, wow, was it just like a bad connection or what was it? And it was not just a bad connection. Something had happened to the line, and all you could hear was distortion and static. So when I began to think about the series that we wanted to start with, the phrase came to my mind, rising above the static. Because in our lives, there's so much static in your life. And everything is competing for your attention. Everything is competing for your focus. So static in our lives can look like many, many, many different things. It can look like people that we're upset with. It can look like fears. It can look like our attitude. It can look like a circumstance. It is all designed to be noise and distortion and to pull you off your path, to pull you off your purpose. And so when we talk about the series that we're going to begin today, the rising above the static, what we're talking about is getting that static out of our lives. And not even so much, well, I probably could say that better. Not so much getting it out of our lives, but making peace with the things around us so that it doesn't pull us off our path, so that it doesn't pull us off of our purpose. Because life is going to happen. How many of you know, you will spend so much energy trying to get yourself free from problems, free from distractions. And if you learn just to kind of have blinders on for where you're going and for what you're doing, static, you'll rise above it. I promise you. So in this series today, we're going to do the Joseph edition, and I'm really excited about the Joseph edition. I really love the story of Joseph, so much so that my youngest son, Parker Joseph, that's where his middle name came from. So I love the story of Joseph. The following week we're going to do Peter. The week after that we're going to do David, and the week after that we're going to do Paul, and we're going to draw some nuggets from these people's lives. So let me get in here. So kind of what I want to talk about first. I was trying to figure out how to go about getting this information, because it's really some powerful information. And before I start reading the story, what I want to do is I kind of want to go over a few items of static. I was going to go over it after we read the story, but I want y'all to listen with an ear to hear these types of static. And in this story, it's so funny. I remember when we first moved to Texas, I would turn on, we didn't have cable at first, because when you first move, nothing's on. So you're trying to, so you're just on the basic channels. And so I was looking at the Hispanic channel, and they had these things called telenovelas. And I remember looking at them, and they always looked so exciting. They were very dramatic. And, I was like, man, I wish I could speak Spanish so I could understand that. But when I read stories in the Bible, a lot of times what I do is I really try to enter into them. Because when you enter into them, there's a wholeness that you can get there, a different perspective. If we're just on the outside and we just look in instead of going into the story, it doesn't read the same. It doesn't seem the same. So what I would definitely say is probably the Joseph story. It could be on, what's that, Discovery ID, the Crime Channel, or it could be on Lifetime. Like, it's a fun, exciting story. There's a lot to it. If you're on the outside looking in, you don't really get as much from it, but I want us to enter into the story today and really look at it through Joseph's eyes. So, some of the things I want you to look for, these are some of the items of static. And hear me, there's so much to get out of this story that this is not the only static in his life. And we're just dealing with the portion of his life. Some of the static is immaturity, favoritism, hatred, jealousy, rejection, and revenge. So those are kind of some of the static items that we're going to be looking for in this story. And I didn't even start this time. It's going to go off. I typically won't read so many straight, but this story, I want y'all to really hear this story. So the story of Joseph goes about from Genesis 37 to 50. We're not going to cover all of that, but we're going to cover part of it. And I do want to read starting Genesis 37. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with his sons of Bilhah and sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now already, we're just starting to get into it, but I want you to kind of get the picture. You know, Joseph has brothers, and in his brothers, Joseph's the favorite. And how many of you know, if you have siblings and you're the favorite child, it's like a double-edged sword. Like, it's good to be the favorite, it's not good to be the favorite. And the people that are not the favorite, they have feelings about that too. So we're going to start getting into that. Now it says, and the reason I brought that one up is he brought a bad report to his father. So we're already getting a little vibe of tattletale, right? He's 17 years old, and that's why I picked the static of immaturity. When we're immature, we don't have the wisdom that we have later on. And understanding that everything that we do, just because we can do something, we might not ought to do it, and we don't have enough history living life to have a context to put things in. So he's kind of going back and tattletelling to dad. And now Israel, which is also Jacob, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. He also made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw their father loved him more than all of his other brothers, they hated him, and they would not speak peaceably to him. Now, I want to stop right there and kind of go through that for a second. His brothers hated him, and they would not speak peacefully to him. So if you can imagine, like I said, in our scene that's already set, here's Joseph. Joseph is his father's favorite, and the brothers aren't really happy about that. And not only are they not happy about it, hate's a strong word, but they hate him, and they don't speak with him peacefully. So we know that there's probably a lot of tension and a lot of ugliness going on. Now, starting 37:5, now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Now, we'll go into that a little bit later, but this is also one of the things that we're talking about with immaturity. How many of you know when you have a dream, you have to be careful who you share it with. You have to be careful of who your inner circle is. You have to be careful of who is for you and who is not against you. I think at this point, Joseph would have understood that not all my brothers are supportive of me. They're not, my father shows a lot of favoritism towards me. My brothers get really upset about that. So in sharing, I think there's immaturity and there's a naiveness here. When we get excited about something, when God shows us something, we want to share, but it does give us a little bit of caution. So again, they hated him even more. And so he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." Now, how do you go? Like, we don't have to, like, if we enter into the story and we're looking at that, and I have some siblings that don't care for me, and I share this dream of basically, which makes me over them, this is they're probably not going to like this, but it's okay. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers. His father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And I love this next scripture, 37:11. His brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. You ever notice that sometimes somebody says something or something goes on and your spirit kind of just like grabs a hold of it? Like, we are designed, we are built to recognize truth. And that's why it's so important for us to kind of clear the agendas out of our life, for us to be able to recognize that when I hear truth, I want to hear truth. So there was something that stuck in there that his dad's like, I love that. And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So we're going on to 12. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. Then he said to them, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. So already, again, we're talking about the static of favoritism. And favoritism, we don't want to read too much into it, but we understand that the brothers were very jealous of him. So dad is sending Joseph out to go check up on his brothers who already aren't feeling it. Now, a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. The man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now here's where the lifetime, and I guess the discovery ID gets kicked up. And now when they saw him from afar off, even before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. Now, how many of people in here have siblings? You've gotten upset with them, you got mad at them, there's a lot of things that you felt, but how many times have you seriously plotted to kill your sibling? Like, this is an intense situation. I see a couple of y'all like looking. So, let's see, it's terrible. Let me see if I keep my place. 18. So they aspired to kill him. Then they said to one another, Look, the dreamer is coming. So they're mocking him, they're making fun. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. He shall see what will become of his dreams. They're back at those dreams he had. They're not feeling, like I said, he's not feeling it. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands. He said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So basically, Reuben's saying, okay, I don't want them to kill Joseph. But notice that Reuben really isn't saying, like, hey, let's not do this. This is a very, very bad idea. It seems like he's not so confident in his position with the brothers either. So basically what his plan is it's like, okay, let's not kill him. Let's throw him in the pit. And then Reuben says, I'll just swing back by later and pick him up and all will be good. So even in that, his brother, the plan is not to stop the other brothers, that it's just to not say anything directly. and come back and get him. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic and the tunic of many colors that was on him. So you're hanging out with your siblings and you're sent to check up on them. So you go and you check up on them, and they see you coming. You could probably, you know what I mean? When you're entering into an area where you're not feeling really welcome, like he could probably sense that already. And entering into that, then they take your clothes off. They strip you of your clothes. So they stripped him, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water. And they sat down to eat a meal. That always strikes me. It seems like a little bit of callousness, right? Here, I'm planning on killing my brother because I don't like my brother. Then one of the brothers like, well, let's just cast him in the pit and leave him in the pit. So they tear his clothes off, throw him in the pit. He's in the bottom of the pit. And next scripture, and they sat down to eat a meal. Like, gosh, like, you know what I mean? Like, it'd be like on those true crime shows where they have that, they commit those crimes and they're like, oh, I think I'll make a sandwich. Like, that's a little bit cold. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was the company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, myrrh, and on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah, another brother, Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And the brothers listened. So two brothers, and it seems like those two brothers hadn't talked. Reuben's like, hey, I'm going to let him get in the pit, and then I'll swing back by later, pick him up. And Judah's like, oh, this is not a good idea. We shouldn't, he is our brother. Let's not kill him. So what he ends up doing is talking them in to selling him to the traders, to Egypt. Then the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, no matter how bad your relationships have gotten with your siblings, since you're sitting here, they probably never sold you. And so, when you begin to think about the story through Joseph's lens, like, that's a rough life. That things would get so bad and so difficult that your brothers would plot to kill you, your brothers hate you, and then you end up just being sold off as a slave. And he had several brothers. Like, this wasn't just like they were, three rolling 5 deep. Like, there was a lot of brothers. And for all those to let this pass. So I can't even imagine how Joseph would begin to feel. Then Reuben returned to the pit. Remember, because Reuben was like, I'm going to swing by and pick him back up later. Returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. Back in those days, that was a sign of grief. They'd tear their clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? Because at this point, Reuben's kind of getting it. Dad's going to be a little bit upset. Dad's going to be a little bit mad about this. So they took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the tunic in blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether this is your son's tunic or not? And he recognized it and said, this is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without a doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his waist and mourned his son for many days. All of his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So I want to talk a little bit about that for a second before we go on. Now, like I said, the reason I'm reading this story more in depth is because I really want you to enter into this story. I want you to place yourself in Joseph's position. You're your dad's favorite, I said, that comes with a double-edged sword. It's nice to be somebody's favorite, right? But also at the same time, oh my gosh, like it creates so much discourse and so much tension in his family, so much so that his brothers aren't just irritated with him, they aren't just peeved with him. There's not just a little bit of conflict. Most of his brothers want him dead, and they settle their bloodlust for, okay, fine, since he is our flesh and blood, we'll sell him to the traders. And so they sell him as a slave off. And we're not going to go too much into 38, but I'll get back to a point of 38. It goes into talking about Judah, and I'll get back to the relevance of that later. Now we're going to skip to 39. Joseph, a slave in Egypt. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph. I love this. Let's say it again. 39:2. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. And then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of the house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and on the field. The Lord blessed it for Joseph's sake. How many of you know, like, no matter what the plans are, if God's favor is on you, that travels with you. Now, since we're talking about rising above the static, when we're entering into the story, I want you to keep in mind, I don't think Joseph is really seeing this as favor. Like, if you're stepping through this, if you're a slave, I don't think you see that as favor. If you've been sold into slavery, I don't think you see that as favor. His life, we can look at it and we can read it from the beginning to the end, and we can see that it has a positive outcome. But how many of you know, when you're living through your life, when you're encompassed in that static, when it has a stranglehold on you, it doesn't always feel like a success story. And I'm sure that Joseph, during these times, it didn't always feel like maybe it was going to have a happy ending, that he can't see the beginning for the end. Thus he left all he had in Joseph's hand. He did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused. He said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand." Like this, your husband trusts me. Your husband has left me in charge of all this. Your husband is fully trusting of me to take care of all that he has. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept anything back from me, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was, she spoke to Joseph day by day, and he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. I'm going to read this again. 39:10. So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. Now, I like that it says day to day. How many of you know, she's not just asking him one time. She's just not trying to get after, this is like sexual harassment. She's not trying to, he didn't say no, and he didn't say no, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to respect that boundary you just set." No. She keeps coming and coming and coming day after day, and trying to get what she wants to happen. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work. None of the men were inside the house, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Basically, can you picture that? You go in, she's like, I think, I'm not exactly sure how the tunics kind of worked, but if somebody grabs your garment and you leave it in their hand as you're running away, like they have to be kind of pulling on that pretty, you know what I mean? They gotta, like, if you look at that picture, they've got to be pulling on it. There's got to be a lot of resistance going on there that be able to get ripped off. And so it was that when she saw he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He has come in to lie with me." I cried out with a loud voice. Hebrews and Egyptians really didn't mix. So he's saying Potiphar brought in this Hebrew and this Hebrew. Like, oh my gosh, of course this Hebrew did this. "And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. And then she spoke with him with words like these, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came into me to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did this to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison." So, your brothers sell you into slavery. So he's there at Potiphar's house. He gets transferred there. That's who bought him. So he's there, probably just now starting to relax a tiny bit, even though Potiphar's wife is like sexually harassing him every day. But probably, probably kind of just getting his life back on an even keel. And then what happens? She didn't like that she was being rejected by Joseph, so she came up with a story, told a lie against his character, and then all of a sudden he's in prison. So how many of y'all understand that when you have one wrong like that, gosh, that's enough, and then you have two wrongs, that's enough? Like, it's hard. So we're going to go on here. "And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand to have all the prisoners who were in the prison, whatever they did there and he was doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under his authority." That's how much grace and blessing he had. That's how much favor he had. He's in jail, and the guy that's in head of the jail basically puts Joseph in charge of it. He did whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. "It came to pass that after the butler and his baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord and the king of Egypt. And the Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, and in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So they were in custody for a while. Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, they were confined to a prison, had a dream, both of them. Each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream its own interpretation. Joseph came in to them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in custody of the Lord's house, Why do you look so sad? They said to him, We have a dream, and there is no interpretation. So Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph. He said to him, Behold, my dream, a vine was before me, and in the vine there were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, into its blossoms shot forth, and clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into the Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days, and within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put the Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to a former matter when you were his butler. But remember me when all is well with you. Please show kindness to me, make mention of me to the Pharaoh, and get me out of the house. Get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me in the dungeon. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the upmost basket were all kinds of baked goods for the Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of this. 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you, hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he had made a feast for all of his servants, and he lifted up the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. So I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about this. So basically he's in the prison. He goes from Potiphar's house where he has immense favor, and Potiphar's wife is after him. She tells a lie, assassinates his character. He ends up in prison. In prison, God again gives him immense favor, and in that favor, the people that are connected to the king, the chief butler and the chief baker, come in and they have these dreams. Well, what do you know? Joseph can interpret dreams. So he interprets their dreams. One of them has a positive outcome. One of them has a negative outcome for him. So he tells, it ends up coming to pass in both cases. One is restored to his position. The butler's restored to his position, and the baker is. So in it, Joseph has asked the butler, please remember me. I'm in here. I'm in here not through anything that I did. I was a slave. My brother sold me as a slave. I got here. A lady lied about me, and I'm here. I'm in a strange land where I don't belong. So please, I don't belong here. I'm trying to get out of here. And so he leaves, and do you think the butler remembers? No, not immediately. Not immediately. But God's timing is impeccable. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, 2 years. How long did he wait? 2 years. Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up from a river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they were fed in the meadow. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, and they were ugly and gaunt, and stood by other cows on the bank in the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking cows. So the Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time. I find it interesting that there's 2 dreams here, and Joseph also had those 2 dreams. He slept and dreamt a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin grains, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt, and called for its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret it. Then, I'm going to skip forward, and then all of a sudden the chief butler says, you know what? I remember, my bad, I remember a guy that was in the jail when you got mad at me, you put me down there. There's a guy in prison, and he interpreted, and everything that he said came to pass. I had a dream, everything that he said came to pass. And so Pharaoh's like, bring this guy up. So he brings Joseph up, and it's interesting because it describes the Pharaoh's dream, and then it goes through it again. So whenever something's mentioned a couple times, when a story goes through a couple times, you always want to make note of that because it's important. And for time's sake, I'm going to really encourage y'all to read Genesis 37 through 50 and really read it in depth, because you're going to get the whole story, because I'm going to have to start summarizing so we can get to our points here. But basically, he tells the story. He tells the dreams to Joseph. Joseph interprets the dreams. He says basically what's going to happen is there's 7 years of prosperity, and then it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And not only does Joseph tell him what is going to happen. He says, the Lord has spoke to you in your dreams, and this is what this means. He gives him a plan for how to store up everything so that after these 7 years of prosperity, they can have enough in reserves so that the 7 years of famine in the lean time, they're going to be taken care of. Egypt will be taken care of. And how many of you know, like, if you have something in a time where nobody else has it, that kind of gives you a lot of power. That kind of, people are wanting, we already know how this is going to kind of go. People are going to kind of come. What's interesting is, this is a guy that's come, this is how God works in his favor. This is a guy, Joseph comes out of the prison. They don't know him. But somehow the Pharaoh recognizes truth. There's something that resonates because Joseph is telling him, hey, you need to put somebody in charge of this program that he just laid out. And Pharaoh goes like, well, seems like it should be you, Joseph. What? Okay, I'll do it. And so ends up putting that in place. He ends up married, has a wife. Pharaoh elevates him to a position that he is in charge of everything. Gives him his ring, puts him in the chariot behind him, basically says, nobody touch this man. This man is as good as dealing with me, except that for the throne. Like, there's only one difference. He sits on the throne. Joseph doesn't. So I tell you all that to set up. He's in a pit, then he's at Potiphar's, then he's in the prison, then all of a sudden he comes out and he's elevated to a ruler over the lands. Now, how many of you know you can't put yourself in that position? That is a God thing. So he's in that position, and they're going through, everything's working well. They start to get into the famine, and all of a sudden, in the land of Canaan, famine is there also. So who ends up on his steps? His brothers. His brothers come in, and they're basically, because the father says, we have no food here. What are we going to do? Egypt has all the food, so go there. Here's some money. Take the money. Buy it. So his brothers pack up, and they go. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. So let's say... Okay, I'm going to pick it up, 42:6. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came down and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Now, where have we heard that before? You remember when Joseph was talking about his dream, when he shared his dream with his brother? And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Crazy. Starting to never doubt what God shows you or tells you, even if it looks like it'd be crazy. I can't even imagine how many times Joseph would have been like, was that a real thing or is that not a real thing? So, and it repeats it several times in here, and I'm not going to go too much into that. But basically, because I'm going to get to the points also, but like I said, I want you reading this story, but I want to kind of set up the story for the lens and the tone at which you read through it. Now, his brothers show up. I don't know about y'all, but if somebody tried to kill me, then they sold me, then all this stuff happens, I'm probably going to be pretty angry and bitter. I'm going to try not to because, that's really no way to live. But gosh, I can't even imagine the shock of, wow, my brothers are here, the ones that tried to kill me, and now guess what? Guess who's in charge of the grain? Who's in charge of whether they get that food or not? The brother that they cast into the pit, the brother that they were going to kill. That's a lot of power. Hopefully Joseph doesn't get power drunk. You know what I mean? It's like, I'll show y'all. So in that, Joseph is really, really overwhelmed. So to speed the story up, like I said, I want you to get into it and I want you to really read it. What ends up happening is they give him the grain, but he's asking him all these questions because, Joseph's curious. How's your dad? And, hey, what is the deal? Because they end up saying, look, no, we're not spies. Because he accuses them of being spies. And he's like, look, we're not spies. We're the man, we're brothers and we all come from the same man. He's like, basically Joseph's like getting information from him. So in that, he reveals the younger brother. And he says, well, if you're, basically we have one brother that passed away and then there's our younger brother. And he says, you know what? Go and come back. And what I want you to do is I want you to bring your younger brother. Now, when he comes back, they go and they come back, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed this up. I want to encourage y'all to go through and read it again, these scriptures. So in order to come back to get grain, what do they have to do? They have to bring Benjamin back, because he has said, don't bother to come back unless you bring Benjamin, because then I'll know what you're saying is true, and then I can trust you. So can you imagine going home? I mean, last time they went out together, well, probably not the last time, but one time when they went out together, they came back without Joseph. So now they're going to have to go home, and they had to leave one of their other brothers there as collateral. So they go home. Okay, we know we lost Joseph already, and our other brother's up there. And in order to come back, we're going to have to bring who? Benjamin, the other favorite child. So the dad's like, no, that's not going to work for me. So ends up, time passes, they need food, they're going to starve, has to go back. So they go back, but they have to bring Benjamin. But everybody's like, don't worry, we got this, Dad. Dad's like, I don't know about that. But so they go back, and when they get there, then they're afraid that because last time when they came back, their coins were still in their sacks for the grain. Like they had paid for the grain, and then when they opened the sacks, they're like, oh, they didn't take our money. So they're hoping, they're like, man, hopefully they don't think we stole this or something like this. So they go back, and then they get them and they take them to Joseph's house, and they prepare a feast. And there's so much that I want to go over, but I want you to read the story. I could sit here and unwind the story for you, but I really want to get to some of the points that, because when you're able to rise above the static, what ends up happening is your purpose unfolds, and God can really work in your life. So we're leaving it at kind of a cliffhanger, but I'll tell you a spoiler alert. What ends up happening is he acknowledges his brothers, they're reunited, and eventually his dad comes up, and it all turns out nice. But there's a couple things that I want to go over as far as what happens when you rise above your static. Do you remember the static that we talked about? The immaturity, the rejection, the abandonment that he felt, all this that happened in his life, he was either going to succumb to it or he was not. He was either going to let that static drown out his purpose. But no, it ended up not. So there's a couple takeaways, and one of the takeaways, Joseph saw his dream manifest. Remember when he told his dreams, his brothers got upset about it, but his dad kept it in his mind. His dreams came to manifest. But so whatever God spoke to you, and it's in there, you don't know when it's going to manifest. But how many of you know, like when you have a dream, and I'm talking about like he had an actual dream, but they can look very different. God can speak something to you, and it just grabs you. Don't lose hope in it. Don't lose heart in it. Keep a hold of it, tuck it away. So number one, Joseph saw his dreams manifest. 2, God has his timing down. Don't question his timing. They wanted to kill him. They didn't kill him. Reuben says, let's just throw him in the pit. Then Judah says, no, let's not do that. Let's sell him. So they sold him. People happened to be coming by, traders. They sold him to the traders, and he ended up at Potiphar's. Then from Potiphar's over to the prison, he interprets the dream, and then nothing. I think what's interesting, because I think, wow, what if that, and everything, we can't second guess the Bible, and everything's as it's supposed to be. But imagine if the butler had told Pharaoh that dream right away, it wouldn't have been as impactful, would it? Because when it became relevant, the Pharaoh was in need. He was in need of having a dream interpreted. So the timing, and then the butler's like, oh, I remember. So even in that, like, I imagine if you're Joseph, it doesn't feel so good going through and stepping through that. But as we step back and we look at it and we walk through it with him, we can see, wow, God's timing. It could only be a certain way. He has the perfect timing. 3, Joseph had favor. Do you see the favor in the story? Like I said, I had to run through it so fast and cut it short. But please, continue the cliffhanger. Everywhere he went to Potiphar's, had favor. How many, like, you just walk into a place and everybody puts you in charge? That happened to him in Potiphar's, that happened to him in prison, and that happened to him in the kingdom. Wow. Like one time, wow, 2 times, wow, 3 times, what is going on? So understand where you have favor and pay attention to it. 4, favor goes outward. Later on in the cliffhanger story where y'all have to finish reading, in the end, he brings his family too, and all their family. I'm talking about you bring everybody you know and you come and we got you set up. Joseph's favor goes outward. All of his brothers, his favor is ignited to. They have favor with the Pharaoh. They get to come out of the famine. They're set up. All of that. If you have favor on your life, or you see somebody that has favor on their life, go be around them. You know why? Because favor goes outward. Favor goes outward. 5, God has people around you to recognize truth. Man, there's no way that people, like he came up out of nowhere. Why would people just grasp to what he's saying? You don't have to make your way. You don't have to get people you don't have to beg and plead and have people believe you. The people who need to see it will see it. And that is so important to begin to recognize. The people, you can't be kept down. If it's meant to be known, it will be known. So I want you to recognize that. And the final point is, God will get you where you need to be. If you think about Joseph's story, he went from the pit, he went to Potiphar, he went to prison, and he went to Pharaoh. God, at no time in there was God unaware of what was going on, what was happening. Never was God shocked, like, oh no, he was intercepted by traitors. No. Oh no, look what his brothers are doing. Oh no, look, he interpreted a dream, but he didn't get to the Pharaoh. No. God knows exactly where you are, and I promise you, you don't have to claw, you don't have to manipulate, you don't have to control to get where you are going. God has you. He will get you where you're supposed to be. You don't have to make it happen. You can't make it happen. Think of the static in your life. If we learn to lean in to static, to not let it take us over, could he control the fact that his brothers hated him? No, he could not. But what could he do? He could control his response to that. Like I said, I really want y'all to go and I want you to read his whole story. Because, when his brothers showed up, they came and then they went and then they came back. Like, he's kind of toying with them a little bit. Not a little bit, he was toying with them. But at the same time, what would we do in that situation? Would we have the grace to forgive them? I mean, they tried to kill him. They sold him into slavery. Like, he had been experiencing a good life for a little while, but how much does that have to hurt? The rejection, abandonment, just even 1 or 2 of Joseph's issues. Like, if we think about in context of our own life, it would be hard to come back from that. But he rose above all the static of that to be able to become a greater part of the greater plan. His brother Judah, you want to take a guess at who comes from that lineage, from the tribe of Judah? David, King David. King David, where's Jesus come from? Like, it's significant, it's powerful. What role? He rose above to play his part in God's plan for us sitting here today. Like, don't ever think that what you do is insignificant. The static that's in your life, if you're able to rise above it, you have no idea the ripple effect that you're creating in the kingdom. If you even think about it, we wouldn't even have static in our lives. Like, you know, the enemy doesn't really, if you're doing nothing for the kingdom, a lot of times you don't have a lot of static in your life, sorry. And not that, you know, I hate for people to think like, oh, so if I'm serving God, I get a lot of, it's not, you know, you have the grace for whatever, you have the grace for your race. But in that, I really do want to encourage you. You know, I always like to do a challenge at the end. And the challenge I want to ask you is, we're going to begin this series, but each week, I want you to ask the Lord to show you the static in your life. Lord, what is a noise? What is a distraction? What is making it so I can't hear your voice? What is making it? Okay, I think I got that under control now. So what in your life is creating a blockage? What is causing static? Where can you not hear your Father's voice? Where can you not see your Father moving on your behalf? Let's ask him to show us where the static is, and then let's ask him how to deal with that static. How many of you know, like, if you get hurt by somebody, like Joseph had the authority to have his brothers killed. He had the ear of the Pharaoh. He could have been like, you know, my brothers are in town, but let me tell you what they did to me. Like, he could have gotten revenge. But somewhere in there, he rose above the static of what was going on in his life. And that is really a key characteristic. We can't really control the static all the time. So, be honest, sometimes we can create our own static. But some static in life we can't do anything about. But I promise you, God is not a God that he would just leave you in a position that you're miserable. If there's an area in your life where you have hurt, where you have pain, if you ask the Father, you will find the answer, no matter what your situation is. So, as your challenge, I want you to ask the Lord this week, where is my static? And where is the way to rise above my static? And when you come back next week, we'll be talking on Peter, another one. It's funny. All the people, my favorite people in the Bible. But it's going to be really good and very powerful. So, again, I encourage you, absolutely. I had to rush through the story, but I wanted to start the story because I wanted you to get into it. I want you to place yourself in it. So when you go back and you read it, Genesis 37 through 50, I want you to put yourself in the story. I want you to ask, say, Lord, help me walk through this story as Joseph. Because I promise you, it looks different. It looks different. Read it several times and walk through it as Joseph. And I think our lives just begin to make more sense when we understand some of these stories, some of these truths. So let's end in prayer. Dear Lord, we just thank you. We just thank you. We thank you for your love for us. Lord, we thank you for your word for us. Lord, we thank you, Lord, that you will speak to us, that each one of us has ears to hear and eyes to see. Lord, that you would show us where the static is in our life. For in each of our lives, it's different. Lord, that you would make us aware of it, and Lord, you would make us aware of the voice, your voice guiding us through these situations, Lord, so that we will be victorious. We just thank you for your wisdom and your guidance and everything, and we express so much gratitude. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.